The sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow over the living room. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her chest felt heavy, her breath shallow, as if the air around her had thickened into something suffocating. She stared at the photo on the mantel, a picture from their honeymoon, their smiles wide and carefree. How had it come to this? The sound of the front door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She could hear the rustle of keys, the soft thud of his shoes being kicked off. He was home. Claire? His voice carried through the house, warm and familiar, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she sat frozen, her mind racing. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now that it was here, she felt utterly unprepared. "Hey, there you are," he said as he stepped into the living room, his smile fading the moment he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" Claire looked up at him, her husband of 10 years, the man she had vowed to love and cherish forever. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his shirt untucked, and there was a faint scent of perfume clinging to him. Not hers. Her stomach churned. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. He hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Okay, what's going on?" She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she unlocked it. She had debated showing him the evidence, but she needed him to see it. She needed him to understand that she knew. "I found this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she handed him the phone. He took it, his eyes scanning the screen. His face paled, and his jaw tightened. It was a text, sent late last night, a message from a woman whose name Claire didn't recognize, filled with suggestive words and promises. "Claire," he began, his voice trailing off. "How long?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How long has this been going on?" He looked away, his shoulders sagging. "It's not what you think. Don't say that. Just, tell me the truth." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "A few months," he admitted, his voice low. "But it's over. I ended it." "Months," she repeated, the word feeling like a knife twisting in her chest. "You've been lying to me for months. And you expect me to believe it's over?" "It is," he insisted, stepping closer to her. "I made a mistake, Claire. A stupid, terrible mistake. But I love you. I love you more than anything." She stood abruptly, backing away from him. "Love me," she repeated, her voice rising. "You don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me." "Claire, please," he pleaded, his eyes filled with desperation. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I messed up, but I'll do anything to make it right. Anything." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Do you have any idea how much this hurts? How much you've broken me?" He reached out to her, but she flinched, pulling away. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice cold. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I'll fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Claire wiped her tears, her mind racing. She had always believed in their marriage, in the vows they had taken. "Till death do us part." But now, those words felt hollow. How could she trust him again? How could she move past this? "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please," he begged, his eyes filled with tears. "Give me a chance. I'll prove it to you. I'll do whatever it takes." She looked at him, her heart torn in two. Part of her wanted to believe him, to hold on to the love they had built together. But another part of her, the part that had been shattered by his betrayal, screamed at her to walk away. "I need time," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I need to think." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, he whispered. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll wait for as long as it takes. Claire turned away from him, unable to look him in the eye. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, hurt, sadness, and something else she couldn't quite name. She walked to the door, her steps heavy, and reached for her coat. Where are you going? He asked, his voice filled with worry. I don't know, she admitted, pulling on her coat. I can't be here right now. He didn't try to stop her as she opened the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. The streets were quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. She walked aimlessly, her mind replaying the conversation over and over again. A few months. The words echoed in her head, each time cutting deeper. She found herself at the park where they had often walked together, hand in hand. The memories flooded back, their laughter, their shared dreams, the promises they had made to each other. How could he do this? How could he throw it all away? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, half expecting it to be him. But it was her best friend, Sarah. Hey, are you okay? Sarah's voice was filled with concern. No, Claire admitted, her voice breaking. I found out, he cheated on me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Oh, Claire. I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? I don't know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to do. Do you want me to come over? Sarah asked. Claire hesitated, then nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see her. Yes. Please. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Sarah promised. Hang in there, okay? Claire hung up and sat on a bench, staring at the empty playground. The weight of her husband's betrayal pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had always believed in their love, in their commitment to each other. But now, that belief felt like a fragile illusion, shattered by his actions. She didn't know if she could forgive him. She didn't know if she could ever trust him again. But she also didn't know if she could let go of the life they had built together. What do I do? She thought, her heart aching. What's the right choice? As she waited for Sarah, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was at a crossroads. One path led to forgiveness, to trying to rebuild what had been broken. The other led to walking away, to starting over without him. Both options terrified her. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts, and she looked up to see Sarah approaching, her face filled with concern. Claire, Sarah said softly, sitting beside her. I don't know what to do, Claire admitted, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can stay with him after this. But I don't know if I can leave him either. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. Whatever you decide, she said gently, I'll be here for you. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew she had a difficult decision ahead of her. But for now, she allowed herself to lean on her friend, to take comfort in the support she so desperately needed. The night stretched on, and with it, the weight of her dilemma grew heavier. Would she choose loyalty, despite the pain? Or would she choose betrayal, and walk away from the man she had once loved more than anything? As she sat there, the answer remained elusive, lost in the storm of her emotions. And so, she waited, unsure of what the future held, but certain that whatever decision she made would change her life forever. Chapter 2. The days following this separation were a blur of restless nights and tear-streaked mornings. Claire moved into Sarah's spare room, a temporary haven where she could gather her thoughts, or try to, at least. The walls of the small guest room felt both suffocating and comforting, a paradox that mirrored the chaos in her mind. She stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. Did he really mean it when he said he wanted to fix things? Or was it just another lie? She had left him with a simple request: prove to me you're serious. Show me you can be faithful. But now, doubt gnawed at her. How could I ever trust him again? She tossed and turned, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. Finally, she sat up, her resolve hardening. I need to know the truth. I need to see for myself. The next morning, Claire called in sick to work. She couldn't focus on spreadsheets or deadlines, not when her life was crumbling around her. Instead, she spent the day planning. She knew his routine, his gym sessions, his coffee stops, his late nights at the office. If he's going to cheat again, it won't be hard to catch him. The thought made her stomach churn, but she pushed the nausea aside. She needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. By evening, she found herself parked a block away from his house, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart hammered in her chest as she watched the front door. The lights were on, casting a warm glow through the windows. He's home. She waited, her breath shallow, her eyes glued to the driveway. Minutes turned into an hour, and just as she began to wonder if this was a mistake, she saw it, the flicker of headlights approaching. Her pulse quickened as a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't his. Her stomach dropped as she watched a woman step out of the passenger seat, her laughter carrying through the still night air. Claire's heart clenched as she recognized her, one of her husband's co-workers, a woman she'd met at a company party months ago. The woman was beautiful, confident, everything Claire felt she wasn't right now. She watched, paralyzed, as her husband emerged from the car, his arm slung casually around the woman's shoulders. They walked up to the front door, their bodies close, their laughter mingling. Claire's chest tightened as she saw him lean in, his lips brushing against the woman's ear. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but the intimacy of the moment was unmistakable. How many times has he done this? How many women? The thought made her feel physically ill. Claire's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling as she opened the camera app. She zoomed in, snapping photo after photo, each one a dagger to her heart. She needed proof, tangible evidence that this wasn't just her imagination, that this was real. Her tears blurred the screen as she watched them disappear into the house, the door closing behind them. She sat there for what felt like hours, her mind racing. What do I do now? Do I confront him? Do I walk away? She thought about storming into the house, screaming at him for his betrayal, but the thought of facing him, of seeing the woman still inside, made her stomach churn. Instead, she started the car, her hands shaking as she pulled away from the curb. As she drove, her thoughts spiraled. Why wasn't I enough? What does she have that I don't? The questions taunted her, each one a fresh wound. She thought about all the times she'd forgiven him, all the times she'd believed his promises. I'm such a fool. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the depth of his betrayal. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was a pattern, a deliberate choice to deceive her over and over again. She pulled into Sarah's driveway, her body trembling as she stepped out of the car. The porch light was on, a beacon of warmth in the cold night. Claire hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorbell. Do I tell her? Do I even know what to say? Before she could decide, the door swung open, and Sarah stood there, her eyes filled with concern. Claire, she said softly, stepping aside to let her in. What's wrong? Claire bit her lip, her tears spilling over as she handed Sarah her phone, the photos still glowing on the screen. Sarah's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images, her jaw tightening with each one. Oh, Claire, she whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry. Claire clung to her, her sobs shaking her entire body. I don't know what to do, she choked out. I thought he might change, but he didn't. He's still lying, still cheating. And I don't know if I can keep doing this. Sarah held her at arm's length, her eyes searching Claire's face. You deserve better, she said firmly. You deserve someone who respects you, who loves you enough to be faithful. He doesn't deserve you, Claire. Claire shook her head, her tears hot on her cheeks. But I love him, she whispered, her voice breaking. Even after everything, I still love him. Sarah's expression softened, and she pulled Claire into another hug. I know you do, she said gently. But love isn't enough if it's one-sided. You can't keep sacrificing your happiness for someone who doesn't appreciate you. Claire buried her face in Sarah's shoulder, her sobs muffled against the fabric of her shirt. She knew Sarah was right, but the thought of leaving him, of ending the life they'd built together, was unbearable. How do I walk away from the man I married? How do I start over? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more painful than the last. Hours later, Claire sat on the couch, the photos on her phone burning a hole in her pocket. She couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind, the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd laughed, the way he'd touched her. It was like a knife twisting in her chest, a constant reminder of his betrayal. She knew she had to confront him, but the thought of facing him, of seeing the truth in his eyes, terrified her. What are you going to do? Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Claire looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know if I can do this. Sarah reached out, squeezing her hand. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. But remember, you deserve better than this. You deserve to be happy. Claire nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She knew Sarah was right, but the thought of leaving him, of starting over, was paralyzing. How do I let go of the life I thought I'd have? How do I move on? She closed her eyes, the tears spilling over again as she realized the truth. She couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't keep waiting for him to change, to be the man she thought he was. She couldn't keep sacrificing her happiness for someone who didn't deserve it. But as she sat there, the storm inside her raging, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't stay silent. She couldn't let him get away with this, not again. She had to confront him, to demand the truth, no matter how painful it might be. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed his number. It rang once, twice, before he answered, his voice warm and familiar. Claire? Is everything okay? She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. We need to talk, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I know the truth. Claire's heart pounded as she stood in the dimly lit hallway, her fingers tracing the edge of the dusty journal she had found hidden in the back of her husband's closet. The leather cover felt cold and unfamiliar, yet it seemed to pulse with secrets she wasn't sure she was ready to face. She had been looking for an old sweater when she stumbled upon it, tucked away beneath a pile of forgotten keepsakes. The sight of it had stopped her cold, her breath catching in her throat. Why would he hide this? She wondered, her mind racing. Claire hesitated, her fingers trembling as she flipped open the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably his, the looping letters familiar yet somehow foreign in this context. Her eyes scanned the words, her stomach twisting with every sentence. I never thought it would come to this, the entry began. But I can't keep pretending. The truth is, I'm not the man she thinks I am. Maybe I never was. Claire's breath hitched, her heart aching as she read on. The pages were filled with confessions, raw and unfiltered, revealing a side of him she had never known existed. He wrote about his insecurities, his fears of inadequacy, his desperate need for validation. There were mentions of fleeting encounters, moments of weakness where he had sought solace in the arms of others. But what struck her most were the passages about her. Claire deserves so much more than I can give her, he had written. She's everything I'm not: kind, patient, loyal. And yet, I keep hurting her. I don't know why I do it. Maybe I'm just selfish. Maybe I'm afraid that one day she'll realize how much better off she'd be without me. Tears blurred her vision as she sank to the floor, the journal slipping from her hands. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts jumbled and chaotic. How could he think that? She wondered, her heart breaking all over again. How could he believe I'd be better off without him? But as she replayed his words in her mind, a bitter truth began to take shape. His betrayal wasn't just about physical infidelity, it was deeper, more insidious. It was about fear, insecurity, and a lack of trust not just in her, but in himself. Claire wiped her tears, her resolve hardening. She couldn't ignore this. She had to confront him, to make him see the damage he was causing not just to her, but to himself. She needed answers, even if they tore her apart. She stood, clutching the journal to her chest, and made her way to the living room. The house was eerily quiet, the silence amplifying the turmoil in her mind. She sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for him to come home. Hours passed, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. Finally, the sound of the key turning in the lock broke the stillness. Claire's heart leapt into her throat, her hands gripping the journal tightly. "Claire," he called out, his voice tinged with concern. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, her eyes locked on the doorway as he stepped inside. He froze when he saw her, his expression shifting from confusion to guilt as he noticed the journal in her hands. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Why did you hide it from me?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't want you to see it." "Why not?" "Because it tells the truth," she shot back, her voice rising. "Because it shows who you really are?" His shoulders slumped, his face crumpling in defeat. "Claire, I know," she interrupted, standing to face him. "You don't get to make excuses anymore. I've read it. I know everything. And I need you to explain. I need you to tell me why." He swallowed hard, his eyes filled with pain. "Because I'm scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared that I'm not enough for you, that I'll never be enough. And I don't know how to fix it." Claire's heart ached at the raw vulnerability in his voice, but she couldn't let it sway her. "So you hurt me instead?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You think cheating on me is the answer?" "No," he said quickly, stepping closer. "Of course not. I know I messed up, Claire. I know I've hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But I can't keep running from this. I need to face it, to fix us." She stared at him, her emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to believe him, to give him another chance. But another part, the part that had been broken so many times, was screaming at her to walk away. "Do you even love me?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. He reached for her hands, holding them tightly. "I do," he said, his eyes earnest. "More than anything. But I don't know how to love you the way you deserve. And I'm so sorry for that." Claire's breath caught, her resolve wavering. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this time would be different. But the weight of his betrayal was heavy, and she wasn't sure she could carry it anymore. "I need time," she said finally, pulling her hands away. "I need to think." He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand." She turned away, her heart breaking all over again. As she walked to the bedroom, the journal still clutched in her hands, she couldn't help but wonder if they were beyond repair, if they were too broken to fix. But as she lay in bed, the pages of his journal spread out before her, one line caught her eye. "I don't know how to be the man she deserves, but I'm willing to try." Claire's breath hitched, her heart aching with a mix of hope and fear. Could they really start over? Could they rebuild what they had lost? She didn't know the answer. But as she closed her eyes, the weight of the journal still in her hands, she knew one thing for certain: the choice was hers, and hers alone.